Hey friends, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm grateful to have you here today with me. I'm going to be making a fandom card using this Kindred Stamps Vroom stamp set. I'm also going to be using my Perfect Catch paper pack from the limited edition kit and a couple stencils from other limited edition kits. And I have my basic dies, the sentiment strips, the card basics, and I'm going to be using the pull and slide dies today. I did put in my list of supplies, which limited edition kits I did use. Like I said, the Perfect Catch paper pad, the Vent Life stencil, and the Your Super stencil. So if you have those in your stash, this is what I'm using. If not, I'm so sorry, but I hope you can find something similar out there in the internet. So I'm starting with my background as usual, as it needs the most time to dry. And I've blended on some gray cardstock, hickory smoke distress oxide, and black soot distress oxide. Kind of went in at an angle just so it looked a little bit more interesting and kind of fun. And then I'm splattering on the white gold from the Starry Colors Pigments watercolor set. And I'm starting with stenciling with the Vent Life stencil. It looks kind of like a metal plate, like on metal stairs and stuff. I thought it gave it a very toolboxy look, which I thought was perfect for the theme of this card using the racing car from the Vroom stamp set. And for the stenciling, I'm going to be using my silver lining lunar paste. So I'm just using a little palette knife to get that all along the top of my stencil, and then using a wide scraper to just bring that down. I'm picking up excess lunar paste as I go down, and then I put it back on the stencil and scrape it, put it back on, scrape it back and forth until all of those little openings are covered with stencil paste. And then I pick up the excess, and as long as it isn't tinted from any ink, and put it back in my jar. I love a good stencil reveal, and here you can see how fun this background looks. I love it. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my area and wash my stencil before that stencil paste dries. And then I set it aside to dry, and I'm going to work on stamping and coloring since that takes me forever. The stenciling will definitely be dry by then. I'm just going to be stamping one of my characters today because I'm going to use him on a slider card, although I think adding the second one in the background would have been kind of fun. And I'll talk about that as I get later on into the video today about how I started off this card with kind of a vision in mind, and it did come out like my vision, but something about my slider and my sentiment reveal just kind of left me feeling kind of meh about it, if that makes sense. And I'll talk about that later, but let's jump into the coloring. I stamped my race car in some alcohol marker friendly black ink. I did use Lawn Fawn's ink because I just refilled it, so it was nice and juicy. And I stamped twice to make sure there was a really good impression, so of course use the Misty to do that. And I'm starting with coloring in the grays, and I'm using BG050 for the back windows as well as part of the caps on the wheels, and it will also be the same color I use to color in the exhaust tubing that comes out of the side. I don't know if that's the right word, forgive me, as well as my lights on the front of the car. But I am coloring in the yellows now, so I started with Y070 and moving into Y050, and finally I will use Y040, and that will color in the yellow of the flames of the car. And I was looking at pictures of this character online while I was coloring, and I noticed that he kind of has a little bit of orange in the flames, and it has kind of a pop cartoon comic book feel. So I used YR170 to add in a few dots to the flames and colored in the rest of the lights. And then I'm using CG 200, that's a Roman numeral 2, to color in the vehicle's teeth in the front of the car as well as his eyes. And I decided to go with more of a green gray for the tires, so I'm using GG9 as the darkest color, and I'm going to use that to completely color in the wheels, the actual tread part of the wheels, and then use it as the darkest shadow for the sides of the wheels. I do that for all three that you can see in the image, and then I use GG5 to be the medium tone, so I color over that dark shadow on the wheels and bring that color out. And finally, GG3, I completely color in the whole wheel to blend it in and create that shadow look on the sides of the wheels. Now for the fun part, the last color I'm using is our reds. So I'm starting with R180 and I'm adding in shadow, and I'm only going to show a little bit of the car. I kind of colored it in three sections. So I'm doing the bottom and back side of the car, and then I colored in the roof of the car, and then I colored in the rest of the car. So I'm just going to show the first part so you can see just how I'm laying down the darkest color. Again, I'm using R180, and I'm adding it wherever I think there will be shadow. So on the underside of the card where those tires are, at the bottom of the car, anywhere where I think would be, a shadow for the vehicle. And then the second color I'm using is R160, and this is a little bit more pinky red than I would like, but I'm just using it as the mid-tone. I'm going to bring in more of an orangey red after this, and that will really make it look bright red like this particular fandom character. And when I'm coloring in part of the car, because alcohol ink does dry, I'm only bringing in that mid-tone to be kind of like a shadow in the areas I haven't really colored yet. So that way, when I go back and color the rest, I'm not trying to blend in the middle of the car. You know what I mean? It's just like in that shadowy part. Let me know if you have questions on that, and I could, show more coloring in a future video. So the last color I'm using is R150, and I use that to completely color in the car, and I think it looks so good, that bright, bright red color. The thing about red is that I tend to get it literally everywhere, so I'm bringing in my white gel pen, and anywhere where I got some red, I didn't want it. I'm just using it as an opportunity to create a nice white gel highlight on the card. Once my vehicle was all colored in, I'm just going to fussy cut it out. I was too lazy to use my scan and cut, so I'm just using some small scissors to trim out my car. And here's a look at all those marker colors I use in case you need to pause and take a screenshot if you also use Ohuhu art markers for alcohol marker coloring. I'm going to start now moving into creating my slider. So I'm going to die cut my background using the stitched rectangle. It's the largest rectangle die in the Card Basics die set. So I'm trying to line it up where I think it will look the best, and then I will run it through my die cut machine. I'm also going to bring out my pull and slide dies. There are two ways to use this die set. You can create a slider card without a pull tab. So you can see I have a little circle and that long kind of cylindrical shaped die, and then the rest of the dies are for the slider. So there's the sliding mechanism, the part that makes a little notch so you can have your pull tab easily accessible. You could do a shorter slider, a longer slider, and then there is a band to keep the sliding mechanism straight on the back side of the panel, and you'll see how I use that shortly. And then there's a little arrow to be an indicator on the pull tab of, the card receiver knows to pull. So after I've die cut my background using that rectangle die, I'm going to grab out the notch die, and I'm going to line it up with the edge of my paper. So the die is butting up against my paper. And I'm gonna just line that up to the bottom of my background as well. There's plenty of room there for my car to move without it, overlapping off the edge of the background. And that will also mean I have plenty of room to add some foam tape later when I assemble this panel onto my background. So now that I have my notch in place, I need to add in the actual opening for the slider. And I'm trying to use my magic mat here, the grid, to get it as straight as possible, and it works out pretty well. So I'm trying to make it straight. I'm trying to align it to the center of that notch so that way my mechanism will slide very easily. And a step that I did in this card that is completely optional, I'm going to save that little part, that die cut, out of the opening because I want it to create kind of like an invisible notch. I'll show you what I mean in a second here. I'm trying to figure the right words, but I didn't want when my tab is closed for you to see the color of the pull tab mechanism through that opening. So I'm going to keep that little piece, that die cut out, and I'm going to glue it onto my pull tab, and you'll see that. I'm grabbing my Perfect Catch pattern paper, and I'm going to grab this yellow pattern paper with the red lightning bolts, as well as a piece of red, like kind of a sunburst looking pattern for my card. And I'm going to cut my pull tab mechanism out of this yellow cardstock. So I'll go ahead and run that through my die cutting machine. And I like how this die has the score lines. So when you run it through the die cut machine, it not only cuts out the shape, but it puts in like kind of perforation marks. I hope I said that correctly. Perforated. That sounds better. And that way it will help you with knowing how to fold that piece together. I'm also going to use the red pattern paper to cut out the band that I'll need for the back side of my slider, as well as my arrow, so my card receiver, which will be my nephew, will know that he can pull on that pull tab. I'm going to use the leftover of this red cardstock as the background of my card, which is why I kind of die cut those pieces in the middle of the pattern paper, because it will be hidden behind my stenciled background. There we go, my slider. I was losing my train of thought. I want to make sure though when I cut it that I don't see the holes through that opening of my slider. So when I pull my character, I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to place it yet. I didn't think you'll ever see the holes, but I just wanted to make sure you didn't if you pull it. So I made sure to trim that down to A2 in size, leaving plenty of room so that way you would not see any of the red through the opening, or sorry, the holes through the opening. I glued down that piece like I said I was going to, but completely forgot that I needed to glue it to the yellow pull tab piece and not the background. So I went ahead and skipped over that so you didn't have to watch me make a mistake. I'm going to show you the correct way to do it. So luckily I was using liquid adhesive, so I pulled that off real quick off the red paper. And I'm lining up my pull tab through the opening, and here you can see I'm going to add liquid adhesive behind this little tiny strip here. And again, this is completely optional. I just wanted to show you how you can add in the extra or the negative piece that you don't need from the die cut into the card, so it just looks a little more cohesive if that's your preference. Again, completely optional. So I'm using the background piece to help be a guide of where I needed to glue down the little tiny strip. And I'm just using my tweezer to try to apply pressure to that strip and lift my background at the same time. So that way it will be in the correct spot. And you can see it's perfectly centered and lined up to the back side of that pull tab. And it will, again, when the pull tab is closed, you won't see that yellow through the opening. So now I'm ready to assemble everything. I'm grabbing my Pear Blossom Press best tape or foam tape ever, and I'm trimming that down to fit on all three sides of my panel. So I'm not going to put any along the edge of the notch opening, but I did put one in the middle, again making sure not to put anything near or too close to the sliding mechanism. I don't want my slider to catch on anything, so I find like this kind of layout of foam adhesive works perfectly. I'm taking my little strap or my little piece that's going to be kind of the stabilizer of my sliding mechanism, and I went ahead and folded it on the score lines, and I added adhesive to close it up, and I'm just making sure I can place it exactly where I need it on the back side of my mechanism. So I'm adding more adhesive there. I added liquid glue, but I realized I also wanted to use some just regular adhesive tape. So I'm going to add that real quick to the back side underneath the notch. It's going to fit perfectly in between this sliding opening, the die cut that I made, the slot and the notch. So it's fitting perfectly right there. So I am centering that between the two die cut pieces, and I'm centering it to align with the notch. So I can put my sliding mechanism through that stabilizer piece because it was, a long rectangle, and I glued it around and it turned into a little kind of band. And then I'm putting my pieces that come through the slider opening, and you can see now it's all ready to go. So now I just need to trim my slider to be to the edge of my card. So I'm gonna know exactly where to cut by gluing down the arrow. So just adding some adhesive, making sure that my slider is all the way pushed in, and I'm gluing that arrow to align to the edge of the notch, the side of the card. And once it's glued down, I'm just going to trim that to cut it down, and you can see now it fits perfectly in that notch, and you can pull it and the sliding mechanism is functioning. So now it's time to put everything together. So I'm going to use some foam adhesive to add my vehicle. So just going to add a few pieces here from my mini size stash of foam adhesive from scrapbook.com. I use the large squares, small squares, strips. I use it everything. And I peeled off the release paper, and I know that I want my vehicle to be as far to the left as I can get it. And then when you pull it, you can see it goes almost all the way to the right and off the car. So I love this. I love that my little vehicle can move and slide. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off the release paper from my foam adhesive now, and I'm going to center it to that red piece of pattern paper that I trimmed down to be A2 in size, and I will glue that to a card base. So of course, I have to test my mechanism. Everything is moving well. You can see that part of that slot opening is showing just right next to the tailgate on the right, but you cannot see the yellow because I glued down that extra piece. It's not necessary. It wouldn't be that much showing, but I just like the cohesive look at the start of my interactive die. So the start of my interactive card, I should say. I die cut a banner from the sentiment strip dies out of some of the yellow cardstock. This is the same piece of cardstock or pattern paper that I used to cut the sliding mechanism, and I'm stamping the sentiment driving by to say. It's kind of a slicker pattern paper, so I use some VersaFine and Onyx black, and I'm being extra careful to not smear my sentiment in any way. And I'm going to pop this up as well, so I'm going to grab some foam strips, and I'm going to trim one of these down to fit perfectly on the back side of my sentiment strip. And I will just add that to the top of my card using my grid here to get it centered. And I'm going to put it kind of in the middle between the top of the card and my vehicle. And once that's done, I was going to stop the card here, but when I was pulling the card, it just felt like kind of anticlimactic, like it needed to reveal something. It just felt kind of empty. So I decided, and this is where I kind of am a little iffy about my card. I love it. This card turned out so cute. I'm so happy with it. But I wish I would have stepped up the reveal sentiment just a little bit. I don't know what I would have done though, so let me know in the comments if you have some ideas. Maybe I can work on this card a little more, or if I make it again in the future, I have some ideas on how to make the reveal of my sentiment a little more exciting. So I did stamp the happy birthday from the same stamp set. I did partial stamping because it's kind of a long in width sentiment. So I did happy and birthday stacked on each other on that same yellow cardstock. And I thought I would just glue that down. And so when the car moves, it reveals the driving by to say happy birthday. But I wanted it to stand up or off, stand off the card a little bit. I wanted to stand out. There you go. I wanted to stand out. So I'm grabbing this particular stencil. Again, this is from the Your Super limited edition kit. It's not available right now, but I'm sure you can find a stencil that looks very similar to this. And I'm adding some Distress ink in Picket Fence to just lighten up the area and have some interest with that stencil. I'm going to cover my vehicle so I can really get in there and not worry about getting ink on my fandom character. And whenever I ink with white ink, I add the ink to my glass mat and then pick it up with the brush because I don't want to accidentally get anything into my ink pad. I can always replace and wash a brush, but it's a lot more expensive to replace an ink pad. So I have that little white kind of, I want it to look maybe like he's, speeding by. And then I put that sentiment right there in the center of that stenciled kind of look, like the exhaust is coming out the back of his car. So that is my card, driving by to say happy birthday. Here's a close-up look at that cute colored in fandom character and my awesome background. But I hope this tutorial was inspirational to you and that you learned something from it today. Let me know in the comments if there's a future fandom character you'd like to see me color, or maybe another interactive die I can show you more of. I would love your feedback in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!